date I set. I was rash and I was stubborn. I bet and I bet and I continued to bet, and I paid them all. Why, the womenkind of my friends grew so brave that those among them who never bet before began to bet with me, and I paid them too. "Never mind," said Charmian to me, "just think of that bow and of being hove to on the China seas." "You see," I said to my friends, "when I paid the latest bunch of wagers, neither trouble nor cash is being spared in making the Snark the most seaworthy craft that ever sailed through the Golden Gate. That is what causes all the delay." In the meantime, editors and publishers with whom I had contracts pestered me with demands for explanations. But how could I explain to them, when I was unable to explain to myself, or when there was nobody, not even Roscoe, to explain to me? The newspapers began to laugh at me and to publish rhymes anent the Snark's departure, with refrains like "not yet, but soon." And Charmian cheered me up by reminding me of the bow, and I went to a banker and borrowed 5,000 more. There was one recompense for the delay, however. A friend of mine, who happens to be a critic, wrote a roast of me, of all I had done, and of all I ever was going to do, and he planned to have it published after I was out on the ocean. I was still on shore when it came out, and he has been busy explaining ever since. And the time continued to go by. One thing was becoming apparent, namely, that it was impossible to finish the Snark in San Francisco. She had been so long in the building that she was beginning to break down and wear out. In fact, she had reached the stage where she was breaking down faster than she could be repaired. She had become a joke. Nobody took her seriously, least of all the men who worked on her. I said we would sail just as she was and finish building her in Honolulu. Promptly she sprang a leak that had to be attended to before we could sail. I started her for the boatways. Before she got to them, she was caught between two huge barges and received a vigorous crushing. We got her on the ways, and part way along the ways spread and dropped her through stern first into the mud. It was a pretty tangle, a job for wreckers, not boat builders. There are 2 high tides every 24 hours, and at every high tide, night and day, for a week, there were 2 steam tugs pulling and hauling on the Snark. There she was, stuck, fallen between the ways, and standing on her stern. Next, and while still in that predicament, we started to use the gears and castings made in the local foundry whereby power was conveyed from the engine to the windlass. It was the first time we ever tried to use that windlass. The castings had flaws, they shattered asunder, the gears ground together, and the windlass was out of commission. Following upon that, the 70-horsepower engine went out of commission. This engine came from New York, so did its bed plate. There was a flaw in the bed plate. There were a lot of flaws in the bed plate. And the 70-horsepower engine broke away from its shattered foundation, reared up in the air, smashed all connections and fastenings, and fell over on its side. And the Snark continued to stick between the spread ways, and the 2 tugs continued to haul vainly upon her. "Never mind," said Charmian. "Think of what a staunch, strong boat she is." "Yes," I said, "and of that beautiful bow." So we took heart and went at it again. The ruined engine was lashed down on its rotten foundation. The smashed castings and cogs of the power transmission were taken down and stored away, all for the purpose of taking them to Honolulu, where repairs and new castings could be made. Somewhere in the dim past the Snark had received on the outside 1 coat of white paint. The intention of the color was still evident, however, when one got it in the right light. The Snark had never received any paint on the inside. On the contrary, she was coated inches thick with the grease and tobacco juice of the multitudinous mechanics who had toiled upon her. Never mind, we said, the grease and filth could be planed off, and later, when we fetched Honolulu, the Snark could be painted at the same time as she was being rebuilt. By main strength and sweat we dragged the Snark off the wrecked ways and led her alongside the Oakland City wharf. The drays brought all the outfit from home, the books and blankets and personal luggage. Along with this, everything else came on board in a torrent of confusion: wood and coal, water and water tanks, vegetables, provisions, oil, the lifeboat, and the launch. All our friends, all the friends of our friends, and those who claimed to be their friends, to say nothing of some of the friends of the friends of the friends of our crew. Also there were reporters and photographers and strangers and cranks, and finally, and over all, clouds of coal dust from the wharf. We were to sail Sunday at 11, and Saturday afternoon had arrived. The crowd on the wharf and the coal dust were thicker than ever. In one pocket I carried a check book, a fountain pen, a dater, and a blotter. In another pocket I carried between $1,000 and $2,000 in paper money and gold. I was ready for the creditors, cash for the small ones and checks for the large ones, and was waiting only for Roscoe to arrive with the balances of the accounts of the 115 firms who had delayed me so many months. And then the inconceivable and monstrous happened once more. Before Roscoe could arrive, there arrived another man. He was a United States Marshal. He tacked a notice on the Snark's brave mast so that all on the wharf could read that the Snark had been libeled for debt. The marshal left a little old man in charge of the Snark, and himself went away. I had no longer any control of the Snark, nor of her wonderful bow. The little old man was now her lord and master, and I learned that I was paying him $3 a day for being lord and master. Also, I learned the name of the man who had libeled the Snark. It was Sellers. The debt was $232, and the deed was no more than was to be expected from the possessor of such a name. Sellers! Ye gods! Sellers! But who under the sun was Sellers? I looked in my check book and saw that 2 weeks before I had made him out a check for $500. Other check books showed me that during the many months of the building of the Snark I had paid him several $1,000s. Then why in the name of common decency hadn't he tried to collect his miserable little balance instead of libeling the Snark? I thrust my hands into my pockets, and in one pocket encountered the check book and the dater and the pen, and in the other pocket the gold money and the paper money. There was the wherewithal to settle his pitiful account a few score of times and over. Why hadn't he given me a chance? There was no explanation. It was merely the inconceivable and monstrous. To make the matter worse, the Snark had been libeled late Saturday afternoon, and though I sent lawyers and agents all over Oakland and San Francisco, neither United States judge, nor United States marshal, nor Mr. Sellers, nor Mr. Sellers' attorney, nor anybody could be found. They were all out of town for the weekend, and so the Snark did not sail Sunday morning at 11. The little old man was still in charge, and he said no, and Charmian and I walked out on an opposite wharf and took consolation in the Snark's wonderful bow and thought of all the gales and typhoons it would probably punch. A bourgeois trick, I said to Charmian, speaking of Mr. Sellers and his libel. A petty trader's panic, but never mind, our troubles will cease when once we are away from this and out on the wide ocean. And in the end we sailed away on Tuesday morning, April 23, 1907. We started rather lame, I confess. We had to hoist anchor by hand because the power transmission was a wreck. Also, what remained of our 70-horsepower engine was lashed down for ballast on the bottom of the Snark. But what of such things? They could be fixed in Honolulu, and in the meantime think of the magnificent rest of the boat. It is true, the engine in the launch wouldn't run, and the lifeboat leaked like a sieve. But then they weren't the Snark. They were mere appurtenances. The things that counted were the watertight bulkheads, the solid planking without butts, the bathroom devices. They were the Snark. And then there was, greatest of all, that noble, wind-punching bow. We sailed out through the Golden Gate and set our course south toward that part of the Pacific where we could hope to pick up with the northeast trades. And right away things began to happen. I had calculated that youth was the stuff for a voyage like that of the Snark, and I had taken 3 youths, the engineer, the cook, and the cabin boy. My calculation was only 2/3 off. I had forgotten to calculate on seasick youth, and I had 2 of them, the cook and the cabin boy. They immediately took to their bunks, and that was the end of their usefulness for a week to come. It will be understood from the foregoing that we did not have the hot meals we might have had, nor were things kept clean and orderly down below. But it did not matter very much anyway, for we quickly discovered that our box of oranges had at some time been frozen, that our box of apples was mushy and spoiling, that the crate of cabbages, spoiled before it was ever delivered to us, had to go overboard instanter, The kerosene had been spilled on the